It's 6:41 and a half here on Sky 99.5 FM. Heading into some news making, into another of the big stories that continues to dominate the headlines this week. The altercation between two crime show hosts, one of whom is an inspector in the Trinidad and Tobago police force. And there are calls now for the program for which he's responsible to be investigated and reviewed. There are also calls, people are conflicted in terms of who was right and who was wrong in that altercation. To give us a perspective on it, we've got on the line with us attorney at law and a member of the Police Service Commission, Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jesse.
Good morning,
Dr. Wayne. Good morning,
sir.
Edison. And good morning to your listeners.
Good morning, Martin George. With regard to the calls for a review of the program, which is said to be a project of the police commissioner, so it's a product of the police service, the Beyond the Tape show. People are wondering, what is the point of the show? Did it achieve its objectives? These are some of the questions coming from the head of the Police Service Union.
Well, Jesse, it's a question that I have raised directly with the commissioner. And, I've done so even in my personal capacity, asking about it, because I have been concerned at times when I've seen what appears to be legal advice or advice on, legal issues or criminal matters which could impact on, things before the courts being doled out and dished out on the program very generously and maybe with the best of intent. But, I sometimes, when I listen to some of it, I sometimes have, reason to just pause to consider whether, first of all, it is accurate, whether it is correct, whether it represents an official position of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, because I don't know that the officer is one of their official legal representatives, so to speak, in terms of a trained attorney who speaks in that capacity. So I have had concerns just from that aspect, just as an attorney at law. This has nothing to do with my role as a commissioner on the Police Service Commission. It's just as an attorney at law, as a member of the public, I have wondered at times in terms of the relevance, validity, and the propriety of, expounding on these issues and these matters with the authority that he does it. There's very often no middle ground in what he says. It's never ever really tempered by words of caution or anything. So he speaks very definitively and very authoritatively, and that's all well and good. But I wonder sometimes in terms of the statements made whether they do not have the potential to come back at some later stage and, bite them, in terms of the way things are said and pronounced upon on the program. So that has been my main source of concern. On the positive side, I will definitely say that as a PR exercise, I think it's of tremendous value and benefit to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, because it does help to present a more human face to the service, in the sense that, yes, there are opportunities for people to call in with complaints and criticisms of the police service, and I think generally the inspector does take them in stride, so that at least allows for that interaction. There's benefit in the sense that they do put up pictures of persons who the police service is actively looking for, that kind of thing. So we must always look for the positives in everything, and I will certainly give kudos in that regard. But my caution would be in the sense of, number one, just ensuring that as far as the legal advice, maybe either the officer should consult with or maybe have on the program, maybe one of the official legal officers of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, or indicate, I guess, on each occasion that, look, this is advice he has received from the legal officer, and this is the official position of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, because I think otherwise it has the capacity to bind the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in ways that they may not later on wish to be bound.
Mr. George, looking at proper procedure, I imagine that it's an inspector who would be in charge of a particular division. Could another inspector usurp that position? He's a functionary in another division, perhaps, go into a particular division and take over a particular case or a particular investigation?
Well, I would imagine that it doesn't represent the norm, and it's not something that would generally be occurring or tolerated. However, I am not privy to what internal arrangements may have been made in this circumstance. I know it is possible that you could have, someone from another division come in and assume an operation because of maybe their history of association with, dealing with that situation or something of the sort. So I really cannot speak to what arrangements may have been made, but I think we all know and recognize that it's not the normal circumstance.
Mr. George, morning.
Morning.
Video recording evidence is admissible in a court, in a trial, correct?
Well, the thing is, it's under very special and limited circumstances. In fact, I think one of the very first matters that I can recall where video recording evidence was used was in a matter, an extradition matter that I was involved in along with senior counsel. It involved the extradition of a Trinidadian national back to Canada. And in that matter, the matter of Mr. Lambert, it was admitted into evidence, the video recording evidence, and, the proper procedures were followed. So the point is, video recording can, in certain circumstances, be used, but usually you have to satisfy criteria, which would sometimes mean that, look, if it is like, for instance, you have in the Commission of Inquiry, there's the suggestion that Mr. Calder Hart may give evidence by video link. So in a circumstance where someone is definitely not available to be present physically in the jurisdiction or so, then yes, you can have their evidence by video testimony or that sort of thing. But as I say, you need to satisfy the criteria. In this present scenario, I am not sure that it can be satisfied at all, to say that you had a need for video evidence, nor am I convinced that any court would accept that such evidence ought properly to be tendered before it.
Okay. One of the charges that was laid against Mr. Alleyne, and we had asked his attorney for clarity. It is alleged that he cursed or used obscene language against the inspector. However, the charges said that he was charged for using, I think it's aggravated language. What is it?
Annoying.
I'm sorry. Yes. So what is define annoying language? Well, we know what obscene is, but if he was charged for annoying, what's the difference here?
It's very simple. It would be using language designed to cause annoyance to persons in a public place.
But for example, what could be annoying to you? So if I say, Mr. George, move from there or something, and I say, Mr. Carr,
that's right.
Yeah, so that would be considered
it's subjective. It is subjective, and it has to be something that the court must look at objectively, even though it is subjective to you, the person who is complaining that it annoyed you.
Okay. Now the other question: contaminating the crime scene. We're looking at the video, and one of the statements that came from again the inspector was that Mr. Alleyne was contaminating the crime scene. Yet there was no the yellow tape that cordoned off the area. It was not in place, and Mr. Alleyne says that he was not prevented by the other officers from entering the compound. So how could he be contaminating the crime scene?
But apart from that, from what I recall of the charges, I don't think there's any charge that was laid in that regard. So I think we need to make a distinction between the hubris and all that was said in the heat of the moment and what was actually laid as a charge in the cold, sober light of day. So I'm not even sure that merits further discussion, because I don't think there was any charge laid in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was something about resisting arrest or obstructing an officer in the course of his duty. So those are two different things.
From what I understand, though, a couple of police officer friends have told me that you only use that crime scene tape to cordon off an extremely sensitive area. But the fact that there is police presence in the area should indicate that you need to conduct yourself in a particular way, and you can't approach the area unless you have permission from the officers. Now, Martin George, one of the things that all of this has done is to make people a little more sensitive and aware and wonder, are police really conducting themselves the way they're supposed to? Are they going about their duties in the right way, and exactly what are their duties, and how should they be dealing with members of the public?
Well, the thing is, what I would say is that had I been in the position of the goodly inspector, I am not sure that I would have been so personally involved, first of all, in seeking to restrain Mr. Alleyne or to arrest him or anything of the sort. There were several other police officers around. If it is that you really felt there was a need to, then they could have been called to do any such thing, or to assist in that regard. So I think there's always going to be the taint of a personalization of the issue because the inspector decided to basically take matters into his own hands. Whether there was a legal justification for it or not, I think he ought to have recognized that there would be the allegation that, look, this is personal. And I think with good reason there would be that type of claim being made. So, sometimes, remember, justice is not something that you just leave in a vacuum. The great saying we have in law is that justice must not only be done, but it must also seem to be done. And I think in this circumstance, it presents a bit of difficulty for any objective observer to say, well, look, this was totally free of any personalization. And I think respectfully, in hindsight, the inspector, upon looking at it, may consider that, look, maybe he ought not to have been so personally involved in the actual arrest and, calling for handcuffs and, all these things that we saw on the video evidence. So that's just my humble view on it.
How would you define force, Mr. George, and when and how it should be used? Excessive or otherwise?
Well, the point is, a police officer is entitled by law to use necessary force in the course of his duties. First of all, either to defend himself, to defend others. I guess if it is that there is a threat of someone obstructing you in the course of your duty, that kind of thing. But the point is, in these circumstances, I would think ad initio, it does present a scenario where people will question, and I think with good reason, whether all of this was necessary as part of your police function for you to be so personally involved as the inspector was in the scenario.
Now, Mr. George, you mentioned and referenced the Mr. Alleyne's inspector making statements on this program and so on. I want to refer here to Mr. Alleyne's attorney on the air in the heat of all that has been happening. He was outlining procedures and intent. Would that have any impact on the judicial proceedings at all?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. A judicial officer is never supposed to be swayed by any such thing at all. You decide your matters independently of what attorneys may say, because the same things may be said in court in front of you as part of the submissions, and you are free to either accept or reject them. So judicial officers, because of their training, they are fairly immune or maybe desensitized to all these public sayings and statements and, what may appear to be, pronouncements by others.
Okay.
Martin George, we're going to have to leave it there for now, but thank you for squeezing us into your busy schedule this morning.
And Dr. Wayne and Edison and all your listeners. I think that, it's part of our public service that we all do when we discuss these issues. And as I say, the purpose of it is really just to stimulate thoughts, discussions, and, sensible, elevated, enlightened discourse so that we may all come to a better place in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Attorney at law Martin George, and a member of the Police Service Commission as well, just weighing in on the hot story this week, one crime show host versus the other.